Ringo Starr, little Richard Starkey from Liverpool, turning 85. How do you relate to that boy from Liverpool?
You never forget that, and emotionally it's still in you.
Ringo Starr just turned 85, but his birthday celebration left fans worried. The Beatles star broke down crying.
I'm proud we've created memories. You know, as a band, we were the best band in the world.
Publicly mourning John and George for the first time during his annual Peace and Love moment. This fragility isn't new. The world saw the lucky Beatle, but they never saw the man battling crippling insecurity and a shocking betrayal that sent him spiraling. So, what's really happening to one of the last surviving Beatles? The answer isn't in his fame, it's in his survival, because the man the world called lucky was a myth. A battle that began not in a stadium, but in a lonely hospital bed, where a 10-year-old boy wasn't learning to play the drums. He was just learning to survive. A childhood marked by sickness and survival. Long before Beatlemania, Richard Starkey was a boy from Liverpool's toughest neighborhood, fighting a private war against poverty, illness, and invisibility. He was born on July 7, 1940, at 9 Madron Street in Liverpool. His world was shaped by the constant shaking fear of German bombs falling on the city almost every night. While the world was at war, his own home was collapsing. His father, a baker, was already drifting away, and when little Richard was only 3, his father left and never came back. His mother, Elsie, was suddenly alone, forced to work all day as a cleaner and all night as a barmaid just to afford rent and food. The poverty was so bad, they were forced to move to a cheaper, harder part of town. This constant upheaval forged a resilience in him, but it was nothing compared to the battle that was coming. When Richard was just 6 years old, his appendix burst. What should have been a routine surgery turned into a nightmare. He caught a life-threatening infection, peritonitis, and fell into a deep coma that lasted for days. No one was sure if he would make it. He was trapped in the hospital, far from his mother, for almost an entire year. When he was finally released, he was 8 years old and couldn't even read or count. He had lost 2 years of his childhood, and the psychological root of his lifelong insecurity had taken hold, a deep, profound fear of being left behind and forgotten. He had just started to catch up in school when disaster struck again. At 13, a tuberculosis outbreak swept through Liverpool and Richard got sick. He was sent away again, this time to a special hospital, where he was forced to stay for 2 more years. This was the moment that would, in a strange way, seal his destiny. He was 15 years old, lonely and isolated. But one day, a nurse, trying to keep him occupied, gave him a cotton bobbin mallet and told him to hit it against a metal cabinet. That simple rhythmic sound lit something up inside him. A health worker then gave him a record called Bedtime for Drums, and he couldn't stop listening. This was the first thing that ever felt like his. When he was finally released at 16, he had spent a total of 3 years of his childhood locked away in hospitals. He returned to the Dingle, one of the hardest parts of Liverpool, a place full of gang fights and danger. He was small, quiet, and unsure of his place in the world, so he joined a gang just to survive. Music became his only escape. In 1956, he got a job as an apprentice machinist, where he met Roy Trafford, who introduced him to skiffle music. They formed a small band, practicing in the factory basement. That Christmas, his stepfather bought him a used drum kit. 2 months later, he joined the Eddie Clayton Skiffle Group and played his first real show. He worked all day at the factory and played music all night. It was the only thing that gave him joy. The ticking time bomb of his career had started. In 1959, he was asked to join the Hurricanes, a band that was already a big deal. That's when he shed his old identity. He started wearing a lot of rings and changed his name to Ringo Starr. He even had his own solo spot called Star Time. By 1960, his band, Rory Storm and the Hurricanes, was bigger in Liverpool than even the Beatles. That year, they went to Hamburg, Germany. The city was chaos, a wild, non-stop blur of playing all night, taking drugs, and barely sleeping. It was there, on October 15, 1960, that Ringo first recorded with John, Paul, and George when their drummer, Pete Best, couldn't make it. He filled in for Pete again in early 1962, and this time, George Harrison remembered thinking, "This is it. The Beatles wanted him." Ringo was at the top of the Liverpool scene, a star in his own right, but he had no idea that the dream job he was about to accept was about to become his worst public nightmare. The golden handcuffs of Beatlemania. On August 18, 1962, Ringo Starr officially became a Beatle. This was it, the apex, the moment that should have erased all the insecurity and fear from his past. He was joining the biggest band in his city, a band he knew was special. 2 years later, he would step off a plane at JFK Airport into a wall of 4,000 screaming fans. His goofy charm made him an instant favorite. In San Francisco, a crowd of 500 schoolgirls went so wild just to get a glimpse of him that 5 of them collapsed from hysteria. One fan, the 18-year-old head of the California Beatles fan club, managed to give him a shirt before fainting right in his arms. He was a global icon, the lovable Lucky Beatle. But this public celebration was a mask, hiding a private and immediate nightmare. The celebration of him joining lasted less than a day. On August 19th at the Cavern Club, he walked on stage for one of his first shows, and the dream turned into a riot. The fans didn't want him. They were loyal to the drummer he had replaced, Pete Best. Half the crowd began chanting, "Pete forever, Ringo never." People threw things at the stage. It got violent. George Harrison was headbutted in a hallway and showed up to the next gig with a black eye. Ringo, the man who had joined a gang to survive the streets, now had death threats. He started wondering if it was even worth it, but the fan rejection was nothing compared to the professional humiliation that came next. This was the core reveal, the moment that would confirm his deepest childhood fears of not being good enough. On September 4th, 1962, he played his first recording session at Abbey Road. The producer, George Martin, was not impressed. Just 1 week later, on September 11th, Ringo showed up for the next session, ready to drum on their first single, Love Me Do. He walked into the studio and saw another drummer, Andy White, already sitting at his kit. George Martin had replaced him without even telling him. Ringo was handed a tambourine. He was humiliated. He was forced to stand to the side and tap a tambourine while another man played his part on his band's first hit. All his childhood trauma, being left in a hospital, being told he was behind, being replaced. It was all happening again, but this time in front of the entire world. He thought to himself, "They're doing to me what they did to Pete. I'm finished." This fear of being replaced became the high stakes of his entire Beatles career. Even after he proved himself, the other Beatles tested him with cruel pranks, hiding his drums, lying about show times, and creating fake emergencies just to see if he'd crack. Then, in 1964, his worst fear was realized. Just before their massive world tour, Ringo collapsed during a photo shoot. His fever hit 102, and he was rushed to the hospital with acute tonsillitis. The band, at the height of Beatlemania, had to decide whether to cancel their biggest shows or replace him. They replaced him. They brought in a drummer named Jimmy Nicole. Lying alone in a hospital bed, Ringo was heartbroken. He watched on TV as someone else sat behind his drums, living his life. It was his childhood nightmare all over again. Sick, isolated, and replaced. He eventually rejoined the tour, but that fear never, ever left him. This insecurity led to his internal collapse. While recording Sgt. Pepper in 1967, he felt invisible. He famously joked, "I learned to play chess," because he spent hours sitting around while John, Paul, and George experimented with sounds he wasn't a part of. It didn't feel like a band anymore. Then, on August 22nd, 1968, something finally snapped. Paul McCartney endlessly criticized his drumming on the song Back in the USSR. Ringo had enough. He quietly walked out of Abbey Road. He told the others he felt unloved and not good enough. John's reply shocked him to his core. "I thought it was you three." Ringo fled to Sardinia on a yacht and, sitting alone at sea, wrote Octopus's Garden. The band begged him to come back, and when he returned 2 weeks later, his drum kit was covered in flowers. But the piece was over. In 1969, Yoko Ono was now a permanent fixture in the studio, breaking the band's one silent rule: no wives. After she and John were in a car crash, John had a hospital bed brought into Abbey Road so she could recover while watching them record. The tension was unbearable. Then came the final, violent break. In 1970, Ringo was sent to Paul's house as a peacemaker, carrying a message that they needed Paul to delay his solo album so it wouldn't compete with Let It Be. Paul exploded. He shouted, poked his finger in Ringo's face and screamed, "I'll finish you now." Ringo, the man who had survived gang fights, just quietly put on his coat and left. It was the only time their friendship ever turned violent. On April 10th, 1970, Paul announced to the world that the Beatles were over. Ringo found out by reading it in the press. No one had told him. The man who had always feared being left behind was, in the end, the last to know. It's shocking to see how a life so public could hide a secret so devastating. Here on RetroFame, we're dedicated to uncovering the true, often hidden stories of the figures you thought you knew. If you believe these stories need to be told, hit that subscribe button so you never miss another deep dive. Now, for Ringo Starr, this reveal was just the beginning. The fallout was even more dramatic. Betrayal, addiction, and rock bottom. The Beatles' breakup sent Ringo into a deep depression. He had found out about it from the press. The man who always feared being left behind was, in the end, the last to know. He sat in his garden for weeks, staring at the sky, wondering what to do now that the music had stopped. The fallout was immediate. On December 31st, 1970, Paul McCartney sued the other three to dissolve their partnership. The Brotherhood was now a legal war. Ringo, the peacemaker, was forced to choose a side. He sided with Paul, a move that shocked John and George. The rift was so deep, he documented it in his song, Early 1970, where he sang about how Paul won't even talk to him. He was adrift. His first solo album, Sentimental Journey, was crushed by Paul's own album release. He tried to find a new identity, but his attempts were disastrous. He starred in the 1969 film, The Magic Christian, but the movie was filled with crude scenes, including one with a vat of blood and urine, that left him embarrassed and deeply uncomfortable. He then poured his money into a high-end furniture design company called Row, which landed a massive $10 million deal to furnish palaces in the Middle East. But the designs were too bizarre, and the company collapsed, taking a huge chunk of his fortune with it. Even his beloved role as the narrator for Thomas the Tank Engine ended in his old nightmare. In 1989, after a contract dispute, he was unceremoniously replaced by comedian George Carlin. But all these professional failures were nothing compared to the secret, devastating betrayal happening in his private life. His marriage to his first wife, Maureen, was already crumbling under the weight of his own drinking and cheating. Then came the bombshell. One night, Maureen confessed that she was in love with his best friend, George Harrison. The betrayal was confirmed when George himself admitted it at dinner, right in front of Ringo. Ringo didn't yell. He didn't fight. He just said, with heartbreaking acceptance, "Better you than someone we don't know." But the end came when Maureen caught Ringo with another woman. This betrayal, combined with his shattered career, sent Ringo into a dark spiral. His use became uncontrollable. In 1978, he overdosed so badly he had to be rushed to the hospital. He later admitted to drinking 16 bottles of wine a day. And his stepdaughter, Francesca, said their house was like a drug den, with Ringo and his new wife, Barbara Bach, hiding from the world, drinking and using every day. Ringo himself confessed that entire years of his life, from 1970 to 1988, are a total blur. He has photos of himself on stage all over the globe, but has no memory of it. This spiral led to the final, horrifying rock bottom. The true, final detail of his crisis. In 1988, one Friday afternoon, Ringo woke up from a violent blackout. His staff told him he had destroyed the house so badly they thought it had been burglarized. But that wasn't the worst of it. They had found his wife, Barbara, so bruised and beaten they thought she might be dead. This was the horrifying moment that finally broke through the haze. He knew if he didn't stop, he would either kill his wife or himself. Just 2 weeks later, both he and Barbara checked into a rehab center in Arizona. Even then, the humiliation wasn't over. In 1980, his ex-wife Maureen dragged him back into court, demanding more money and painting him as an out-of-control addict. She even called him a soding great Andy Capp, comparing him to the famous cartoon drunk. He had lost his band, his friend, his dignity, and very nearly his life. The last Beatles standing. In the end, Ringo Starr's story isn't one of luck. It's one of almost unbelievable survival. He was the man who spent his life fearing he'd be left behind, only to become the last one left standing. He survived a childhood of catastrophic illnesses that stole years of his life. He survived the public humiliation of being replaced not once, but twice. He survived a devastating betrayal by his best friend and a violent, decade-long spiral into addiction that nearly cost him his life. This lifetime of trauma is what makes the recent heartbreaking news so poignant. The tour cancellations in 2024 weren't just a singer getting sick. They were a terrifying echo of the illnesses that haunted his childhood. His tears on his 85th birthday weren't just nostalgia. They were the public tears of a man who has carried the private grief of it all. The replacements, the betrayals, and the loss of his brothers, John and George. He's the man who finally got the flowers on his drum kit, but only after a lifetime of fighting to prove he deserved to be there. But what do you think? Knowing the lifetime of trauma, betrayal, and addiction Ringo Starr endured, does it change how you see him as the lucky Beatle? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. We have a new video just like this one coming next week. If you love digging deeper than the headlines, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss another video. If you love this story, we've got more celebrity deep dives queued up for you. Just click the videos on your screen to continue. Thanks for watching.